Welcome to episode 4 of Art and Faith, Faith and Art. And the title of tonight's episode is Noah's Ark, a Jewish Perspective. And if cool is a proper term in art history and art criticism, then what I'm going to show you now surely rates as super cool. And what I'm going to do, I will show you a coin. And this coin was minted in either the year 217 or 218 AD. And we know that because on one side of the coin is the image of the Emperor Maximus, who reigned at this time. And the coin was minted in a town in what today is southwestern Turkey, and the name of that town was Apamea Kibotos. Apamea Kibotos, and we know that this is where it was minted because it tells us such on the coin itself. And the coin it's remarkable because it's an instance of Jewish art. It used to be a kind of standard judgment in art history and art criticism that the Jews were aniconic, that the Jews did not have images and that the Jews did not allow images. And they did this in obedience to the first commandment, which forbade the worship, the making and the worship of graven images. Now, I said that this used to be the kind of standard judgment, and in the 20th century, several rich and remarkable finds were made, kind of archaeological discoveries. For example, in a town called Dura Europos, which was located on the very eastern boundary of the Roman Empire, and the boundary between the Roman Empire and Persia. There was this town, Dura Europos, and in the 250s it was conquered by the Persians and then became kind of filled in with kind of sand and dirt. And in the 20th century, this town was discovered and excavated, and there were several very remarkable archaeological finds there, one of which was the earliest, more or less intact Christian house church from the 250s, because this is when it was destroyed, that was decorated with a number of very interesting kind of works of art, and perhaps I'll look at that in another lecture. But there was also discovered a Jewish synagogue, and the Jewish synagogue was richly and extensively decorated with frescoes detailing scenes from the what we call, Jews didn't call it, but which we call the Old Testament, most prominent among them the story of Moses leading the Israelites through the Red Sea. So there did exist in Judaism, at least as it existed in certain places, a very kind of rich and kind of elaborate and sophisticated artistic kind of life and kind of culture. The Jews had a visual culture, and images, and especially biblical images, were part of that biblical culture. And this, I think, is an important fact to note because it kind of plays into the kind of argument about the value of art for Christians. That it's certainly true that no Christian art can be found before more or less the year 175, and the earliest Christian art is maybe a couple kind of rings with kind of images of the crucifix on them, or some of the earliest strata, in the catacombs of Rome, where you find various kind of symbols of Christ, symbols of hope, symbols of deliverance. So the question arises, why did Christians not have any art before the year 175? And one kind of theory is, well, the early Christians were aniconic, they were against images, they were aware of the danger of worshiping images, and that at some point that original and pure tradition got corrupted. And in answer to that, I say, well, if that was the original tradition, it got not only corrupted, it got gloriously corrupted, because once Christians began to produce art, they produced it lavishly and filling almost every available surface, and works of art with great beauty, but also great kind of intelligence and meaning and theological significance built into them. So there are other reasons, I think, to explain why the early Christians didn't have art. First Christians tended to be poor, from the lower strata of society, slaves, for example. And in order to produce art, of course, you have to have a certain amount of wealth and leisure. Some of the works we looked at earlier, the marble sarcophagus that I showed you in the catacombs, the walrus tusk, the images on painting on vellum, well, those are kind of luxury items. So the first Christians were poor, they didn't have any money to produce art. And also perhaps another explanation is that Christians saw that God's revelation was a new revelation and a new way of life. So Christians wanted to separate themselves, mark their distance from the surrounding culture. And the surrounding culture, the culture of paganism, was a kind of, paganism had a rich kind of visual culture, and especially in its worship, where kind of statues of the gods played a prominent role in kind of pagan worship. So Christians didn't want to have images because they wanted to be different from the pagans. So none of that means that Christians were against images as such, but that they had sort of kind of economic, perhaps, or prudential reasons for avoiding them. But of course, as I said, that once the images began to be produced, they were produced in a wonderful kind of abundance. And just on a personal note, thinking about the place of art in the Christian life, I would say, as a matter of my own personal experience, never have I felt that images blocked or distorted my access to the divine, images were never a kind of impediment or falling away from the reality and truth of Christian worship. I've only ever found that images facilitate and kind of enrich that whole experience. And woe to anyone who tries to take that away from me or from the church in general. So now I think I'm going to show you the coin, and the coin bears tells us the story of Noah and his ark. And the coin has two sides. So one side you can see there the picture of the emperor kind of Macrinus, and that's how we're able to date this coin. And here we have Noah, and on the right side you see Noah and his wife in the ark, with the first dove that returns, and then Noah and his wife standing on the ground after the waters of the flood have receded. Now, interestingly, this is a piece of kind of Jewish art, and it is to be read from right to left. As we know, Jewish script is written from the right to the left. And so the kind of habit of seeing, the habit of viewing that a Jew would have would be to naturally look at the right side of the page and move to the left. Our habit of reading and our habit of looking is the opposite. We write from left to right, and so when we read an image, we tend to kind of read it from left to right, and most images are kind of constructed in that way. Another feature of this image is that it contains two episodes of the story in one field. It contains Noah and his wife in the ark, and then Noah and his wife on the dry ground. And this is also quite a common feature of early Christian and medieval art, is to take one kind of artistic field, in this case the coin, and to put two or more episodes of the same story within that kind of one field. And you can see here that a number of features. That first of all, you see Noah and his wife in the ark, and you see the kind of the dove on the right. And the dove on the right bears nothing in its mouth, because the first dove that Noah sent out returned with nothing, could find no place to kind of rest his feet. I'm just looking here to see if I can find this. Then Noah sent forth a dove to see if the waters had departed from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him in the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So that first dove, but the second episode, the second dove bears very prominently the kind of olive branch. And that dove bearing the olive branch is a sign to Noah that the waters had subsided. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. So 2 episodes of the story there told in the 2 doves. And then the final episode of the story is Noah and his wife standing on the ground. And it's a bit hard for you to read, but they are in this kind of posture that we've seen before, which is the kind of orans posture, that they are thanking and praising the Lord, standing now on the dry ground for the deliverance that he has brought them from the waters of the flood. Now, another feature of this image has to do with the place where it was found. It was found in a town called Apamea, and Apamea Kibotos, it's a word for kind of box and ark. And the Jews believe that let me just read this here. So the image was a reference to the local Jewish tradition that Mount Ararat, the resting place of the ark when the waters of the flood receded, was located in the vicinity of Apamea. So the Jews had a kind of belief, kind of memory that nearby Noah's ark had come to rest on Mount Ararat. And so this was a kind of biblical story that was part of their culture, part of their lore, part of their kind of self-identity. And how remarkable is it, and how cool is it that this coin, this image ends up on a coin that brings us sort of great kind of fascination and great delight. And the final note is that scholars say that where an image appears, it's probably not the first time this image arose, that the makers, those who were casting this coin, probably were drawing on a pre-existing tradition, either an image of the ark in a manuscript, or perhaps an image of the ark in a kind of a fresco, something in the synagogue, or in a kind of illuminated kind of manuscript. So there we go, Noah and his wife in the ark. Noah and the ark delivered from the waters of the flood, and lifting up their hands in praise and thanksgiving to the Lord God for their deliverance. And may the day come upon us soon, when the present crisis pass, when the coronavirus is tamed and brought under control, that we ourselves can lift up our hands in praise and thanksgiving as we return to our churches to worship and to praise God and to celebrate the most holy Eucharist.